Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldy, and this is my husband and co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
All right, thank you for joining us today on Management Muse. We're talking about confidence and how the good and the bad for confidence, and we have Lynne Liberato with us today. She is the former chair of the United Way for the Greater Houston area, and she is the former president of the Texas State Bar Association. And she's also done a whole bunch of other things like the Supreme Court, and she's a senior counsel at Haynes Boone, and she's amazing. And so, she's going to talk to us today about confidence. And this whole conversation started with us being at dinner, and she made the mistake of telling me a story, and then I roped her into this episode.
Oh, no, I'm delighted to be here. Delighted to be here. You know, as a lawyer, we tell stories. And so, this is easy to do and fun to do. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, good. I'm glad that you tell stories because that's what we're here for. And I'll chime in. And because I know you were like, I'm not sure what I would call that. And so I'll chime in because I got an idea now. It took me a couple hours, but after a couple hours, I was like, oh, that's my old friend, confirmation bias. So
and I better act confident. You know, this is one of those things like giving a speech about being a good speaker. It show, it's like, okay, if I don't act confident here, then what do I know about confidence? But anyway.
Yeah, I think of those times where like somebody sends in a resume and it says detail oriented and then like it's spelled wrong.
Yeah. Same problem.
All right. So tell us, how has confidence and believing your own cooking helped you?
Well, I'm a service provider as a lawyer. And if I don't have confidence, then how can a client have confidence in me? That's part of what I just say you sell, but you want your clients to feel like you know what you're doing and you're confident in your knowledge and in their case. And then the second thing, I go to trial and I go before appellate courts. And when you're in front of the courts, if you're not confident in your position and what you believe, then you're never going to convince somebody else. So it's like probably a two-pronged thing. One, inspiring confidence, right, in your clients and in the court. And two, it's being persuasive. You're not going to be persuasive if the judge, for example, asks you a question. You go, I think this is it, Judge. You need to be on it. You need to respond. You need to believe it, and you need to sell it without looking like you're selling it. So that's the advantage.
And when we had talked initially, because that's like projecting confidence to sort of instill confidence in the people around you.
Correct.
You had mentioned that there was a confidence where you really believed what you were saying.
Right.
Like over time,
that's right.
You become more and more confident in your own arguments, which of course then would make it easier to look confident.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's, I thought was the interesting point was that, it's believing your own cooking.
Oh, absolutely. And so you have to be aware of that. And as you get more senior, you start learning that that's the case. It is not unusual when a client or a new case comes in the door that you're like, oh boy, because I don't get easy cases, and most lawyers don't get easy cases. If it's easy,
anybody could do that.
Yeah, they'll resolve it or whatever. They're almost always hard. There's shades of gray in virtually every case. No. Your client isn't always 100% right and there's 100% wrong or vice versa. And so as you start working on the case and developing the facts and looking at the law and dealing with the other side, you start feeling better and better about your case. And it's like maybe a form of confirmation bias, which is what you've said. So all of a sudden you're really seeing what aspects of the case support your client and your view. Not 100%. Sometimes you go, oh my God, this is worse than I thought. But most of the time, that's not the case. And so as you get closer to trial or closer to handling, the appeal and being the oral argument, you really start believing it. And where that can cause problems. And I mean, before I finish that thought, you still want to believe it. I mean, it's good to believe it. Believe it with the information, knowledge to back it up, but you want to believe it because that goes to the confidence. And like the jury, the judge, even the other side, you want to have that confidence. But where it can get you into trouble is that sometimes you ought to settle. Sometimes you do need to back off a little bit and you need to look at the bigger picture and say, we're not going to win, or there's a reasonable chance we're not going to win, or we may get a bad business result. Even if we win, sometimes it's not worth it. There's a cost in litigation, not just that is a monetary cost, but an emotional cost. Executives, the time costs. I mostly handle business, one business versus another. And so when you start believing it so much, you can lose sight of all that. And so that's where it's good to, one, recognize that can be a problem. And two, to the extent you can, you surround yourself with other people who can go, hey, time out. Wait a minute. So that's where it can be a disadvantage.
I could definitely see that. Yeah. I'm going to circle back and just say a little bit about confirmation bias. So that way people who maybe never heard the term, and maybe a refresher for those who have. So confirmation bias is a bias where we have a theory about the world, and then we go forth and we collect data that supports that theory and discard data that refutes it. And so normally we think about it in the negative. And so that was one of the reasons why I found what you were saying. It took me a minute to actually connect it up with confirmation bias. But that's why it took me, that's what I liked about your topic, was that it's a different way of looking at confirmation bias. And, like most of the biases we have, they actually serve a good purpose. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why we do it. It's just, our brain likes a shortcut, but the brain likes a shortcut that generally works out well for us. And yet, a lot of the time, we tend to think about it in terms of like the negative. Like, interestingly enough, when I teach this to, students, or when I have taught in the past, I actually use, being arrested as the example. Like those police officers have a hypothesis about you.
Right.
Shut up. Because anything that you say probably isn't going to move them off of that hypothesis, and call your lawyer.
I think that's really good advice. Excellent advice. And it's interesting, your description of confirmation bias is exactly what lawyers do. Exactly what lawyers do. And another aspect of it, Cindy, you raise another really good point, is the client. Because what will happen, and this is like your students in a way, although they're in a little bit different context, but not that different in some ways, they come to you and they say, here are the facts. Mm-hmm. And every one of the facts is truthful.
Right.
Right? Or in their mind is truthful. Maybe there's a little bit of shading. And so there's a confirmation bias there that actually is harmful to them because it's good to get everything out on the table. Now, as an experienced lawyer, you hear it. When you first walk in the door, you're very questioning. Where it comes the most for me, because I'm primarily an appellate lawyer, in other words, the case has already been decided, is I have the trial lawyer come in and he or she is saying, this happened and this was wrong and the jury didn't see this and the evidence didn't show this. And they're certain that the jury got it wrong if there's a jury. The judge was dumb or didn't get it wrong.
Or it was unfair.
Or unfair. A lot of times, it just wasn't what, we weren't treated fairly. And really that's all these things kind of wrapped in together.
It reminds me of what I didn't meet my grandfather, my mom's dad, but he's famous for saying this to my mother, who can be very positive. And, she can have confirmation bias quite frequently and vehemently. And apparently, she'd get that way. She'd be stomping her foot, saying it was a certain way. And then he'd look at her and he'd say, only jackasses are positive.
Oh, dear.
and that, I think that may be like what we all need to remember a little bit is like if we're so positive about something, maybe we're being stubborn like a mule and a donkey.
Funny. Well, most things in life aren't black and white. I mean, that's why you have lawyers. And so, there are other aspects of it too. I thought you were going to say there was a judge I used to work for, and his name was Lee Duggan. He was a great storyteller, but he would describe people not infrequently as often wrong, but never in doubt.
That's good.
I like that. Yeah. And it fit. I mean, this is the thing. It fit for so many people. So anyway, but the jackasses. He was a little, that one's like straight to the point.
Yeah, well,
right?
That's New Hampshire for you. You get straight to the point there. Yeah, okay, Lynn, so how has overconfidence, how can it get people into trouble?
Well, it can get people in trouble if they can't back it up. So by that, I mean that generally speaking, it is good to be confident. And you might say there's no such thing as overconfidence. I would almost go to that point when your confidence is merited. And it's like so many attributes. It's hard work. And so the more knowledgeable I am, for example, when I walk into court or when I'm dealing with a client or whatever, the more confident I am. So doing the work leads to confidence.
Sure.
Not doing the work is whenever you might call it overconfidence because you don't have the stuff. You didn't do the work
I see what
to
you're
back
saying.
it up. Now, when I say that, and I think this is something that really good lawyers do, and it applies more broadly too. But I think court is such it's not just a petri dish. It's just it focuses so many things that are true in real life. It's just you just have more focus on it. And so in this instance, good lawyers will say to a judge, for example, "Judge, I don't know the answer. I should know the answer," or however you want to phrase it. But if you don't know the answer, and sometimes you just don't, you've done all the work and you say, "Judge, I don't know the answer to that. I'll get it to you and I'll get it to you later."
I'm going to just interrupt there.
Yeah, please.
That's actually something we need to do as managers and leaders.
I bet it is. Absolutely.
Nobody knows all the answers.
Nobody. And sometimes you need time to think about it.
Right.
To me, and I tell this to my adult sons, and to the young people I work with, in almost any situation, be genuine, whatever that genuineness is. And in the circumstance, whether as a manager, which I'm also been a manager, I was on the board of the board of our law firm, and have supervised lots and lots of lawyers in United Way and too. People appreciate that authenticity and that genuineness, and people are smart. They pick it up every time. So I think broadly speaking, being genuine enough to say, "I don't know." And if it's true, to even say, "I don't know, but I should know. And I'm sorry, but I will find the answer." Or to say, "That is such a complex question and a good question," and mean it, right?
Or just hadn't thought about it that way.
Hadn't thought of it. I need some time to think about it, to give you an answer. And I don't think I've ever said something like that I haven't gotten a positive response. Now, I don't want to say it in court any more than I absolutely have to, because I want to be so prepared. But you'll get questions sometime. I'm going to tell you, when I was at the U.S. Supreme Court arguing, Justice Scalia asked me a question that was I just say off base because it was his question, so he gets to ask whatever he wants. But I truly didn't know the answer. And here I am at the Supreme Court of the United States, and I said, "Justice Scalia, I don't know the answer. I think this is the answer, but I'll find out and let you know." And he goes, "Oh, I already know the answer. You got the answer right."
And I think that's also a good point. I think you made a couple of really good points there that I just want to emphasize. The first is, you have to have credibility before you can say, "I don't know."
True.
So you can't walk in there unprepared. You have to be prepared and basically get most of it right, but be kind to yourself and go in with the expectation that, we we have limited cognitive complexity. Like, we're not going to think about everything.
As much as you try.
Exactly. And they have experiences that may lead them to ask questions that we hadn't. They're going to see it from a different perspective. And that goes for organizations that are more common than court, although court is also an organization. And so when that happens, be kind, but that's not a reason to not prepare. Like,
absolutely. No.
You have to have that credibility to be able to get away with it.
That's right. Now, having said all of that, if lawyers are listening, they're going to be shaking their head a little bit. Sometimes you bluff. Yeah. There are times you bluff, you run a bluff, but you have to really be knowledgeable. And I think that's where it's hard when you're younger, because you don't have that. It's not really emotional intelligence. It's experience intelligence to know right when you can bluff and when you can't bluff. And so if you're in negotiations, say to settle a case, you bluff some of the times. And it doesn't hurt your credibility necessarily if you get called on your bluff. You hope you don't.
We kind of expect it a little bit with negotiations.
You expect it with negotiations. So it would be true with other types of negotiations. So it doesn't mean sometimes you're not running a bluff. And if you don't run a bluff with confidence, you're not going to run the bluff.
No, so you're going to be giving your tell at that point.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like what would it be? It would be like, the equivalent in poker of not having your poker face.
Or going, no, I'm not going to fold.
Yes, exactly. Well, so, yes, that's a good example. Because you're just like, no, that can't happen. So, I think the point is, and to your question, is that generally it's not an issue to me of overconfidence. It's underprepared or sometimes lack of judgment. And it may not be your fault. It's lack of judgment. You might be 23, right? Which is okay. That you miss the boat on being overconfident, even though I don't like the term overconfident.
We could just say, when does confidence get you into trouble?
Well, there you go.
I don't know if you have any examples, but how has the bluffing, not necessarily you specifically, although those are probably the stories you have more readily available, but just in general with what you've seen in court or negotiations, how has the bluffing, what's a good story with a bluffing that backfired? I've got a story.
So when I first started in private practice, I worked for this primarily with his partner, and I mean, he's Mr. Charm, and he's just the most confident person. He's got that deep, booming voice. And he was talking about the facts in our case. Now, I had worked up the facts, and I knew them inside and out. And there were some weaknesses in the facts, but he's talking about them, and he put a totally different spin. And maybe I would say maybe the facts weren't exactly as he said, but I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, I got it wrong. Oh my God, it didn't. He said it with such confidence. That here, I, who knew more about the case, is kind of a baby lawyer, but that's true a lot of times. The baby lawyers know the most about the details of the case.
That's true.
And it taught me a lesson. It taught me a lesson on confidence. Now, I'm not saying whether he should have done that. It worked. So, I guess he should have, and we were in negotiations with the other side. But that's where I really saw in action exactly what we're talking about. And I'll never forget it. And it changed me as a lawyer probably as much as anything I've ever experienced. Because here, he was so good. He was so confident in what he was saying that here I, who know more about the case than anybody at the table, even included probably the other side too, was going, how did I get that wrong? How did I get that wrong? So that's sort of my first story. I think there are other stories since then that just have to go with where there have been some times. I know, I'll give you one example. So I was arguing something, and the judge, it was really it was a big deal case. The judge asked me a question, and I actually gave him the wrong answer, not on purpose. I really didn't. I just wasn't, I don't know. I just,
you might have remembered wrong, whatever.
Clicked in my head wrong. And so, but I was so certain and he's a really smart judge. I mean, really smart. So I gave him my answer and I know I was super confident about it, even though I was 100% wrong. I didn't figure that out till later. And he ruled in my favor. And not only ruled it in my favor, but he said, Miss Liberato said so-and-so, she's right, and on we moved. And then later on, I kept thinking, there's something wrong. Well, as it turns out, I was wrong. Now, I'm not saying I should have made it up. I'm just saying here was an example of a time where I was wrong, but I said something with the confidence, and I have a lot of credibility too, and I don't ever want to squander that, that this really smart judge bought it.
Right.
And ruled for us. So.
I mean, it happens, like even with like teaching sometimes, like, especially with experience, you evolve and then you look back and you're like, yeah, I probably really screwed that class up on that one topic. Really sorry about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's right.
Hopefully I didn't get a lot wrong, but every once in a while you're like, oops.
Yeah.
Oopsie.
I'm sure you didn't, but they're just sort of lessons on confidence and what a difference it can make. And the best thing to do, though, is to be confident, but have the facts and the information and the work to back it up. That's the best.
Tell me about like some of the mentoring that you've done.
Well, I think with mentoring, it's the same across the board. And that is you mentor by example. Mm-hmm. Or you maybe mentoring, you lead by example, you teach by example. And the extra step, and I think it's particularly important right now, the extra step is that you talk to the young lawyer or the young person you're managing afterwards to kind of do a download. Here's what I did. Here's why I did it. What did you think? What did you see? What did you learn? That's a very hard thing to do because it takes time. Mm-hmm. But that, to me, is the best way to teach and to teach confidence. The second thing, though, is when somebody does something really well, you tell them. You absolutely tell them. And when they don't, you pretty gently tell them, this is what you can do better next time. But that's sort of basic, seems to me anyway, management. But whether you're teaching confidence or you're teaching, how to argue a summary judgment, it's the same thing, is that reinforcement, direct discussion afterwards. And I'll tell you, I've got on my soapbox just a little bit about this right now. Okay. With people not being in the office as much anymore or not at all, it is absolutely critical. People say, and I hear this all the time from lawyers, but I know it's broader than that. These young people, they have to come in the office. How are they going to learn? We have to mentor them. That ship has sailed. Truly, that ship has sailed. They'll come in some, but it's never going to go back, in my mind. It's never going to go back to the 5 days a week they're already there. The responsibility then is even more, to me, on the manager to include them in conversations, to talk to them, to mentor them in a direct way that expands on example. And so I think it's always been true, but now it's an imperative.
Well, and so you said the, leadership by example as sort of the cornerstone for mentoring. Right. How are you doing that when they're not around to visually see what's going on?
Right.
What have you changed about how you're mentoring?
Well, I talk more. I talk to them more. I include them in phone calls or Zoom meetings, whereas I wouldn't have before. It's a little bit easier. I have to do a little footnote on this part of the discussion. It's easier to do that because it doesn't take as much of their time. I live by the billable hour. Well, the billable hour. So every minute they're participating, say, in a call or a meeting that you really can't honestly bill the client is time they're not billing or working on billable work. But because they don't have to get in the car, for example, and I can either say, sometimes I'll say to the judge or the client that somebody's sitting in or, kind of explain that, but they don't have to turn on their camera to be a part of the conversation, or at least to listen. And so in a way, it's easier. But the way I do it is to be as conscious as I can, to talk with them about the decision-making aspect of what we're doing and why we're doing, and get feedback, which is almost always questions, and sometimes really good questions, sometimes not so good, but sometimes really good questions where I go, oh, that would have been a good idea. So I think that's it more than anything. I'm sure there are people who have really good ideas on this, but it's just that one-on-one conversation. It doesn't have to take that much time.
Hello, Musers. Now it's time for commercial break. It's time to ring the register. So today I'm going to talk about culture and our Cobra product. So Cobra is our comprehensive survey that can help leaders and organizations understand, well, a whole bunch of things. Basically, we construct it so it's about 15 minutes long for the person taking it, but we work with the organization to figure out what they need most to be surveyed. But we look at topics such as satisfaction, engagement, how communication flows through the organization, your influencers in the organization, and the big one, culture by department. So you can see how tight your organization is operating and maybe find some ways to help you get it all more in alignment with one another. And on top of all that, on top of the survey and all those findings, we come to you and we do a facilitation for about 3 hours where we make sure that your leadership gets something out of it. So it's not just a survey that your people went through and then nothing ever happens. We help you figure out what you find interesting and the things that you're going to tackle going forward. So if you're interested in that product, you can find us at culture.com, and that is spelled a little different than the way that it sounds. It's CULSURE.com, and you can email us there or give us a call. Thank you. Do you see any differences between, so I'm going to ask you about gender differences.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm asking is because generally women get penalized for having what are traditionally considered masculine traits. Like
Correct.
We get penalized for being aggressive, competitive, and confident.
Yeah.
And yet I don't know how you'd actually be a lawyer, at least if you're, going to court.
Yeah.
You could be a real estate lawyer, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, they have to be confident too.
They have to be confident, but probably not the aggressive argumentativeness.
Yeah, right.
And so how do you see gender differences with like the type of work that you do? And how do you explain how you've been able to thrive and you've seen other women thrive?
It goes back to being genuine. I really think I'm a nice person.
Yeah, you're very sunny.
I am. I'm very fortunate, so I should be sunny. And I don't try to be something I'm not. I'm not aggressive. I'm not in your face. I don't trash other lawyers. I don't get mad in court, but I do think I convey confidence because I'm very confident. But it's real. My confidence is real, and it's born of having been a lawyer for 40 years and having a lot of experience and working really hard. But even as a younger lawyer, I worked really hard, and I probably many times was the most prepared person in the room at a cost, of course, but I was, and yet I never fell into that mode of I don't know what to call it other than aggression, but kind of what you're describing. To me, when women do that, generally, and some are that way and it works for them, but generally when they fall into that mode, they're not being genuine. And so it doesn't work. It makes them feel uncomfortable, and the other side or whoever they're, sees it as a weakness. And so people are always telling me, "You're so nice. I'd love to see you in court though." Oh, wow. And I'm like, I'm totally the same. I am totally the same in court as I am sitting with you right now.
Well, and
because that's who I am.
It's obviously worked for you. I will say that, I mean,
that's okay.
I'm very competitive and very aggressive. Sometimes that has come up against me. But
Cindy, maybe our definitions aren't the same as aggressive. More like this obnoxiousness or yelling at people, and I see it at court. I've seen all this at court, or just tearing somebody down. And sometimes judges will let them get away with it. It just doesn't work for me. I had an experience fairly recently where, and this relates to confidence and gender too. Lots of lawyers on the other side, lots of lawyers on our side. And there was a woman on the other side who I really hadn't had much contact with before. I was friendly to her, but she just didn't look the part. She disheveled. Her clothes were kind of sketchy, and she just didn't move right. I mean, all this kind of stuff that didn't convey confidence, right? Mm-hmm. And yet she got up, and the more she talked, the more I was like, damn, she's good. And the guys on the team with me afterwards were like, I didn't expect her to be good. She really did a good job. But one of the things I think that points out is you can overcome it, but why? Why wouldn't you show up in court from the start looking the part? So I think confidence, which you can overcome, and she certainly did, but she started down and had to build herself up. And I'm sure that's true with the judge too, that we were arguing that the judge is going, oh God, they've got this token woman. Couldn't she have at least taken a bath? Not quite that bad. Not quite that bad. Don't
misunderstand. She have brushed her hair
she
just
never
brushed.
She just didn't look the part at all. And I for young lawyers especially, I think looking the part, and I think that's true in business. Look the part. I've noticed bankers are like this. Bankers dress very conservatively. Now, if you're a real estate agent, you dress a whole different way to inspire confidence.
But you do dress up.
But you dress up and you dress a certain way. Bankers, they all got the memo, whether they're 21 or 81, they look like bankers. And that's good because you want someone you're trusting your money to look that way. So I think whatever area you're in, that you've got a big step up by looking the part. And this goes to confidence, to exuding confidence, and to making yourself feel confident. I think that's important.
I think I think she probably built momentum, but yes, I agree with you. She probably would have been better off if she
would have started in a whole different place. And I think the fact we were all so shocked.
Right.
So she had to be really, really good. If she had just been kind of medium, she would have never convinced anybody of anything. But I don't think anybody listened to the first 10 minutes of what she said, because you're kind of going, all right, I don't know why they brought you in. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, wait a minute. That's a good point. Wait a minute. Anyway.
Right. So you'd have to be able to pull that off, you actually have to be extraordinary.
Maybe that's not the best example to use for how you should look the part, because she certainly overcame it. But she had to overcome it.
It is a good point. I think you're going to have to be extraordinary
and
to overcome it.
She truly was. Yeah. She truly was.
And who knows? Maybe on a different day. We once were conducting interviews for a company.
Yeah.
And this guy came in and he had like his undershirt, like a suit jacket and his undershirt on, and then no socks. And it was very Don Johnson, but this is, like 2010s.
Yeah.
And
now people watching this aren't going to know Don Johnson.
Oh, that's true. Miami Vice. Look it up, people. He was like a fashion icon. So, I think, and so, we're kind of like, well, that's different. And he gave a really good interview, and then he couldn't help himself. He had to tell us what happened. Like, he'd spilled coffee all over himself and didn't have the ability to and I don't know what happened to the socks. Maybe I'm making up the socks. But anyway, he had to take off his shirt, and all he had was the undershirt, and didn't have coffee on it. And so he figured coffee all over me versus a white T-shirt.
Don Johnson.
I'm going to go with the white T-shirt. So who knows? Maybe that lady had something else going on.
But think how endearing that is. And, if I can say how genuine that is. And you remembered him. I mean,
and he was also a good interview. So you're sitting there going,
yeah.
Okay, dude, you couldn't have put on like a button down.
Sure.
And then, you come in and he's got like he has good conversation.
Yeah,
so similar to your example, he actually was really good in the interview.
That's something.
And then told us the rest of the story. But so that's what makes me think of your lady. But, generally, like, especially if you're in the beginning of your career, you're faking it until you make it. Mm-hmm. And that means dressing like everybody else. If you go back 20 years, would you tell your younger self to be more or less or the same level of confidence?
Same.
Okay.
Same. Yeah, same. I got it 20 years ago, but that may be because I was in my 40s 20 years ago. If I were to go back to my 20s, I think I would say be more confident, but I still think I got it. And now that's not very helpful to tell somebody else. I just always believed that if I tried hard enough and that I was prepared as I possibly could be, then I had earned the right to be confident. It's not to say that there haven't been times where I've just blown it, or there's times I've walked into a situation and I haven't been confident. But I don't think anybody's ever known it. Mm-hmm. I really don't think they've known it. Yeah. I haven't, and another thing we haven't really talked about, I think too, there is a fine line between confidence and arrogance. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you cross that line into arrogance.
What do you think that line is?
It's like obscenity. You know it when you see it. I wish I could answer. I could answer. I don't know the answer.
You're quoting. That was a Supreme Court justice who said that, right?
Yes, correct.
hey, there.
Smart, good girl. Good for you. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Oh, that's funny. I think that I would say the line is when you cease to be open to even consider other positions, perspectives, arguments, that you then cross the line from just being confident into arrogance.
The thing I would layer over the top of that, but I think you're right, I would layer over it sort of an attitude about yourself that somehow you're either better or but it ties into what you're saying, that you're not listening to other people or listening to the other side. Arrogance is not a good look, but you do see it a lot in lawyers. Can I mention one other thing? And I was thinking of it when I was looking at you about confidence. This is particularly true for women, and I didn't think of this. I've heard it, but I've seen how it manifests itself. How the space you take up as a person conveys confidence. And women, and I've seen many times, women do this, even at the podium, even when they're arguing, they take up very little space. Whereas men...
Yes, there are actually
always.
Videos on the bus about men taking over like multiple seats with their legs apart.
Exactly, right.
And here I am sitting with my legs crossed.
No, but that's okay. I mean, I don't have to be like a man. But you also, if you're going to convey confidence, to get back to this confidence thing, your body language is important. And you don't have to think about it too much, because the key point is to sit back from the table a little bit or back from the podium, and to use your space to where you're taking up, like for me, I think just putting my hand up here, I do it automatically. I don't have to think about it. But there are a lot of women in particular who, I don't know what culturalization this is, would sit here like this. And the look like this is way different from the look like this.
Well, yes, you do look very comfortable. I have to admit that I am leaning forward, but mostly because of the chairs.
Different. Well, I think you can lean forward. And if you're arguing a case when you want to make a really good point, you lean forward. But that doesn't mean you do this, right? You're not doing this. And this is what I'm talking about. So from a real practical standpoint, if I may, I think that's useful information. Since I've rambled so much, I feel like I ought to be concrete on some things.
And there's some research around that. It's obviously they talk a lot about qualifiers and saying, well, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Or, and
I do that.
It's a hard one to break. It's a hard one to break. Sure. But instead of just saying what you think, it's like qualifying or qualifying what you hear. I was told, instead of just saying
correct
what you think. So, that's always a big one. The not being able to take a compliment is a big one, which we had a joke before we got in here. Yeah. Because I told Lynn she looked nice, and she told me that I looked nice. And then she quickly said, and I'm not just saying that because you just gave me a compliment. And that's what we're...
Is that an example?
Yeah. Well, it would be, except for that you explained that you weren't doing that. Because that's what happens, right? Like people who aren't very...
I really meant it.
But people who aren't very confident with a compliment will tend to immediately turn around and instead of just saying thank you,
right,
they turn around and they give you a compliment, that may not have been top of their mind. I'd like to think that Lynn really did like the way that I looked when she saw me, and so we're gonna run with that.
No question about it.
And so there's that. But I think with some of the other things that you're talking about, the slowing down, like people who move, especially women who fidget a lot. You have to look and make sure you're not fidgeting, because it basically is giving the people who are watching you the impression that you're not as legitimate, you're not as confident,
right?
And slowing down, which is really hard for me as a New Englander. We move fast, and I'm like the road runner for walking. That's my dad always used to call me as road runner, because I just fly. Like I would have students following me back from the classroom, and they never want to walk next to you, and I get that. And so I'd be walking in front of them, but then like I'd take two corners and I'd turn around to see where they're at, and I would be slowing it down. And they'd still be very far behind me. So anyway, I say all that to recognize that it can be a challenge, but like weirdly, not where you're moving so slow that it's painful for people to see, but the less fidgeting, slower movements subtly convey confidence.
Yeah. It's good advice. I think that's good advice.
It is.
Oh, no. I have to say that. It is good advice.
It is. Anything else that you want to dive into on confidence?
It's been great. What a joy to be able to visit with you and talk about something I normally wouldn't talk about. It gave me a chance to think about it. And, of course, it's always fun to be around you. So thank you for inviting me, and an honor.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm glad I got to rope you in with the dinner.
I'm easy. Thank you, Cindy.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I wish Jeff were here, but he couldn't make it.
Me too.
I appreciate you coming and us getting this podcast filmed. Thanks again for joining us on the Management Muse. We appreciate likes, stars, downloads, shares, and subscriptions. For more information on the resources that help us generate this content, check out the reference material in our show notes. Special thanks to Rebecca Henley, Abby Ariano, and Ariel Villafane. Thank you. See you next time.